This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibe. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Ahoy, ahoy.
What are we talking about tonight, Puka?
This evening, we are doing the third of 3 episodes on that weighty tome, Dreams and Nightmares. Well, maybe not that weighty, just dense. That dense tome, Dreams and Nightmares. And we'll be focusing on the deep dreaming, trods and freeholds. And we have a special guest, Charlie Cantrell, to help us discuss this book. So, hello, Charlie.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
So, Charlie, for people who haven't heard you previously on the podcast, returning guest, do you want to give a little introduction about yourself?
Well, let's see. I'm Charlie Cantrell. I have been role-playing since the 90s. I got into professional RPG freelancing with C20. That was my first Changeling the Dreaming 20th anniversary edition. That was my first professional RPG work, and I have stayed involved with Changeling the Dreaming professionally and not so professionally ever since. But Changeling the Dreaming has always been one of my all-time favorite role-playing games, so I am very happy to be involved with it.
Yay.
Right on.
So, yeah, let's dive into the book now. When we last left off our adventurers, they were fighting off a band of red caps. Or does somebody else want to summarize it? Or should I summarize it?
No, just go for it.
Okay,
I think you're off to a great start.
Okay, yeah, they're fighting off a band of red caps. Now they've stolen the flying frog dragon demon things and are currently up in the air for like a week, maybe. It's hard to tell time in the dreaming. They also lost another one of their party members or their oath circle or whatever. And after a week they land, and there's a lot of like everyone's remembering things and everyone looks different, and then the little thing about how the chimera in the area are like kind of afraid of them all because of their banality.
But also their power.
Yes. And takes us into geography of the deep dreaming. It's like the far dreaming, but more.
Yep.
They kind of point out that the whole notion of geography is sort of a misnomer once you get this deep into the dreaming. But I liked that it kind of described it as being in an endless cycle of change, sort of co-created with mortals who are dreaming. So that maybe it's difficult to actually storytell what that would be like, but I really like it conceptually. It fits into that cosmic scale kind of role-playing.
The other thing that I didn't remember, but I rediscovered when I was preparing for this, was how the deep dreaming has like certain stable spheres within it. Is the way I think it described. Almost worlds in and of themselves, with Arcadia and it calling out Arcadia as one of them, and then these other spheres being only slightly lesser than Arcadia, and I just did not remember that at all. But I don't think that actually got brought up in the geography part of this chapter.
No,
I think that was later on.
Yeah, the other two, the near and far dreaming, when it talks about it, it's like talks about these things, then it goes into more detail in the geography section. These are much less connected. I think there's a bit of overlap, but it's a lot. There's a lot of things talked about in one, not in the other. So why don't we go through? Yeah, it talks about things like how you get into it. You go through the mist. There's very little of the silver path in the deep dreaming,
which you find out later is because the silver path is infused with everything in the deep dreaming.
This is. I don't know if it was intentional. I'd say this is the least consistent chapter too of this book. With itself.
Yes.
It's like, are they just trying to be like that's what it's like in the deep dreaming? Because it's
even from one paragraph to another, which we'll get to in just a minute.
Yeah.
My quote unquote favorite part of this chapter.
Ooh. Josh, do you recall earlier in the book when we talked about how confusingly there was a note that changelings who die in the dreaming are gone forever, and yet in the prose story, there's a whole exchange about, oh, well, they're dead, but they're not really gone. So again, internal
Yes,
contradictions.
I think one of the characters even says, "We ourselves watch the fires take their soul back to the autumn realm."
But they also do mention that part too earlier in the book, so the fire thing. So
Books written by committee.
yep.
Well, interestingly, this one's not even that big of a committee. It was only
Yeah.
3 people got a writing credit for it, which is way smaller than most books writing teams have these days.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get into, remembrance is now really intense. It says sometimes the feelings linger even if the memories don't. And we get arts and realms in the deep dreaming, which reminds me a lot of Unleashing in C20. It's like your cantrips are now
exactly
unleashing,
what I wrote.
basically.
I had the same thought too. I don't think it was conscious on anyone's part when we were developing C20, but it is neat the parallels that happen. So.
Yeah, the one difference is you can use bunks to make it more stable. I keep going like, how would I incorporate this systematically? But maybe that's the wrong way to think about the deep dreaming. I don't know.
The augment gets ratcheted up to 11.
Yeah, 11 out of 5. It's
okay. So we're going into augment now.
Well, there's one. Before we get to like the details of the augment, it also says like a statement that I just don't understand about it, where it's like, with the exception of the she, most changes are somewhat muted when employed against other Kithane. I don't know how to mute, like, how many dice you get to strength. Like, how does that muted?
So my interpretation of this has always been, because everyone is going through the augment equally, they can still interact with each other normally. It's just outside observers, or non-changeling observers, non-chimera observers, see this craziness that's happening because their brains just can't comprehend what's happening.
So it's about the behavior stuff and their actions, I guess.
Yeah, so they see all this crazy stuff happening that's just completely impossible. But from the changeling's point of view, my interpretation is that things are fairly normal. I mean, sure, a troll might be lifting up a mountain and he couldn't in the autumn realm, but, you're in the deep dreaming, so that feels normal. Which then brings me to my favorite part about this, because it specifically calls out unenchanted mortals being the ones who are truly affected by this. And then in like a paragraph later, it specifically says that unenchanted mortals are forbidden from ever entering the deep dreaming.
It also says that like mages are the one exception to the unenchanted mortals.
Mages can come into the dreaming, but they lose all of their magic unless they do something in the heart of Arcadia.
Yes.
Yes!
Yeah.
And that's as detailed as the book gets on that. Is something in the heart of Arcadia.
Yeah.
There's also an interesting story hook buried in there somewhere, because we get the note that you have to pass through the Mistweir, that heavy misty barrier between the far and the deep dreaming. But then there's also a note that the only 2 ways to actually enter are by following a trod, which are rare, or a path of Balor from the deep umbra, which is the only way a mage presumably would get in the first place. So those paths are one way. You'll find yourself in the deep dreaming and suddenly your magic doesn't work. What happened?
And the story they have is an example of entering the deep dreaming without going through a trot. But
well, that depends on how you define it. Because the silver path is diffused throughout the deep dreaming, in a way, just about any path you take in the deep dreaming could be a kind of trod.
Yep.
Weren't they following some kind of sky trod, though, like early on?
If I recall correctly, it said the beasts were flying of their own volition and they couldn't control their direction.
This chapter is a bit. We'll get more into this.
The chapter, or the fiction, just kind of ends after this. Like, this is the end of the story. So it kind of just ends in the middle of things without resolving anything. I don't know how to feel about that.
And then we get a completely new narrator fiction bit, I think. I'm not sure how to describe it. Chapter 5. I can't remember how chapter 3 starts out. I think chapter 3 is mostly an omniscient narrator.
Yeah,
and then
we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, it talks about you can get to. A few have gotten to Arcadia and the doors are sealed. The mist's weird, like you said.
I think I do want to take a minute to appreciate the Mistweir, just because I do like the description of it. It is a cool concept, and that's a thing I can say about a lot of stuff in this book. There are lots of really cool concepts that I wish that they would have taken and developed and made a few more plot hooks around.
Yeah.
As we keep getting, like, the Mistweir, it gets a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah, including talking about the Goblin Market, which is like, I want more on that. That was like one paragraph, and I'm like, I want the Goblin Market.
Yeah, a deep dreaming Goblin Market. Can you imagine what that might be like?
Yes.
Oh, it also says Arcadia is a city.
Yeah, in this chapter it says that Arcadia is a city.
Yep.
This chapter is the important part of that sentence.
Yeah. Or at least it's part of the chapter. I didn't check the rest of it.
That's true.
Yeah, we have the Goblin Market, the Wastelands with the pool of counted stores, and then the Great Engine. I thought the Great Engine was also kind of cool.
Yeah, the Great Engine has always fired my imagination ever since I first read this book. It's something that I have always really wanted to use in a chronicle, but I still have not figured out a good way to work one in, and that brings me back to what I really wish they had done. I wish they'd had called out plot hooks around all of these ways to get your troop into this area and have it affect things.
I mean, we're actually almost done this chapter already. And I would have liked, even more than that, talking about how the heck you're supposed to run a game in the Deep Dreaming. Because they have weird augment things, which may or may not mean anything. Okay, you have the art changes, and then you have some like locations later on that are not making sense to me as being in the Dreaming at all, some of it. And that's it. Like, it does not tell me how to play a game and like run it. I've tried running in the past, and we've just been like, yeah, just ignore it. Let's just wing it and not roll dice. Like, that's about where I've been. But
that's what I've always done. I had a chronicle that actually spent a relatively significant amount of time in the Deep Dreaming, and that was mostly the way it ended up. Is we just didn't do dice. It was all mostly narrative.
But then they have all these rules involving dice. So probably what you're supposed to be doing, like they recommend doing. I mean, we can do whatever, but it doesn't do a good job at explaining what to do.
They do specifically note that birthrights and frailties no longer have dice rolls, so that at least you don't have to worry about. You just get all of appearance or strength dots or whatever kith you may be playing.
Or stamina dots. Like, what does that even mean then? And also your running speed still. So. And the trolls are like actually not as strong as they should be because they're like comparable to like a Grawl war form or something. Not quite mountain lifting. Things like that.
Yeah, I think the Augmen is probably, or the Augmen. I don't know why I always add an extra U into that. But anyway, the Augmen, I think, is one of those things that I wish could be tweaked some to make them, instead of so heavily mechanic based, so you're buffing stats on the character sheet, but make them more of a story game type thing where, kind of like Fate or something like that, where they provide moves that you wouldn't be able to do normally. Something like that.
I think there's a little bit of that in here.
This was published in 1997.
Let's be fair. Before story, those sorts of games ever came on the scene, which is fair. But this seems like a good opportunity to do that.
There's a couple in here that I think stand out, like the Puka shape-changing birthright, where it mentions Puka can become dragons here if they so desire, but they may opt never to change again and leave their motleys in search of a new life, where the redcaps are always unsated. And then my favorite, the Slua can turn into vapor, which I think is just the coolest shit. So
that is cool.
You don't like trying to just describe your she ranging in appearance from 9 to 14, depending on...
I feel like once you get past 5, you just add that many adjectives.
Yeah, it's like 6 I can see. You're more beautiful than the most beautiful person. Cool. 11?
The she frailty with the Augmen, I'm not sure what to do with, because they get their empathic blindness, so they can't even conceive of non-she existing.
Well, it specifically says they can't do empathy rolls. Yeah. They can still be like, treat them like objects to be manipulated, including socially.
I suppose that's true. But it's one of those things that just sort of, it feels to me it cuts off role playing opportunities instead of adding them.
Oh yeah, the same as the like. Okay, well, if these birthrights did apply with each other, it's like, oh, your red cap's now eating everybody.
Yeah,
What's to do with that?
It specifically says that in their frailty.
Yeah.
They're like, any changeling who gets too near a red cap might end up lunch.
Yeah, or it's like, okay, Puka. I don't actually like the combination of the one of the birthrights and the frailty here, because it's like the confidants kicked up to 11. Everybody will tell them their secrets, but the Puka will think they're lying anyway and won't even want to talk to them.
Yep.
Yeah. Why?
The implication there to me is the onus is on the Puka who goes into the deep dreaming to like remember enough of all of the beans that the people around them spill, so that when they get back out, if they can remember enough of it, they'll be able to realize, oh, actually those weren't all lies.
Yeah, but they don't even want to talk to them.
Maybe that's like, reading between the lines too much.
Yeah, because like you're the most charming person ever that you just go out of the way to avoid everybody.
But what you were just saying, Puka, that about the having to find a way to remember what happened, so that when you get back, you'll know things. The section on the Mistweir, this is also one of my frustrations with this chapter. The Mistweir specifically does not allow memories to return from the deep dreaming once you leave it. So it does not allow memories to escape the deep dreaming.
I think of this chapter as being more. I mean, this book has a lot of it going on all through it. But when anything else would be like, okay, we need a new book on the dreaming. And there's lots of ideas for what to put in the deep dreaming stuff in this chapter, right? But
yes,
you can't just keep it as is. Like, you gotta...
Yeah, you'd want to modify things to grant role-playing opportunities instead of cutting them off left and right.
And also being like, okay, it's fine. You're in a contradictory... shifting dreamscape, but that doesn't mean your rules should be a contradictory shifting like something. It's like I'm trying to read this book while dreaming
yes,
and understand the rules and make rulings there.
Yes,
but to your point, Charlie, about wanting more story hooks, and Josh, to your point about the realms that are in the following chapter, not to nudge us in that direction or anything, but those, like we said last time with the realms that we get in the first half, they're almost like, to me, it reads like a D&D compendium of like, here are a couple pages on each of a whole bunch of realms that you can just run a story in. And the rest of the geography of the deep dreaming is like that. What's the term in a video game? When you're going from world to world on Mario or whatever, and you're just kind of like walking along the road for a while and nothing really happens.
A loading screen, so the game has to have nothing happening for a little bit, so it has time to load up the next section.
That's chapter 3.
So. That's a good description, yes.
Yeah.
Because then the chapter 4 ones, I mean, frankly, it reads to me like, I say this without judgment, they imbibed whatever kinds of substances they had on hand and just went to town. And yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's stuff in chapter 4 that just reverberated throughout the game line ever since this book got released.
Yeah. And I was surprised how much I had forgotten about that it was the first time it appeared here, because like you have the Triumph Cask and Koraxara and all the stuff from Denizens and...
So do we want to move on to chapter 4?
Let's.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, so we left off the previous 2 episodes. We went up through Echoes of Lost Arcadia, and that would take us into Koraxara, the Red Plains.
One of the coolest things in this book.
I wanted to mention, so we did talk briefly about the Arcadia Echoes, but then also they have this distinction that they call the Heart's Realms, for reasons I'm not entirely clear on. But it says that they contain fugitive pieces of the Arcadian dream, and each realm, almost to me, it's very conceptual. So Koraxara, the first one, is like the dream of war, because it's just constant conflict and bloodshed and everything, and presumably that's the root of that fantasy or that idea in the minds of dreamers. And all of them are meant to be like cursed or corrupted in some way, because I don't know, I guess the shattering did stuff, whatever. Separated it from
It
Arcadia.
implies the Fomorians are sleeping there for Kuroksara specifically.
Also that. Well, yeah,
Yeah,
in that one specifically.
The Red Court sleeps beneath them, yes.
Yeah. So what I especially like, though, is before we get into the individual realms, there's a note at the start of page 76 where it says, "The true Arcadia is the story, with a capital S, built of all possible stories." And it's a very meta sort of cosmology to look at Arcadia, which I like better than just, oh, it's the homeland of the Fae. And I kind of would like to see that played up more. I don't know if that's the direction Changeling was ultimately going to be headed in, second edition and later on, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
But anyway, Kuroksara, the Red Plains.
There's a picture with Kuroksara.
There sure is.
For over 20 years now, I've been trying to understand this picture, and it's lived in the back of my head. And is that a door? Is there like a guy with an axe, like armor, standing in front of a door? That's a face?
It's definitely some sort of portal, and I don't think the face is actually part of the portal thing. I think it's actually coming out of it. It almost somebody has opened the Triumph Cask, and the horde of horrors are pouring forth from it. But I'm not sure that's what it's actually supposed to be, because it just doesn't look quite
when
like...
I first saw it originally back in a long time ago, I thought it was like a train with that weird demon face.
That's kind of awesome.
Should we just kind of... Myself, I have brief descriptions of each of the realms. I don't know if we want to fly through them or talk about them individually.
Let's at least touch on each of them.
Okay.
Talks Kuroksara, the different factions fighting over it. The Triumph Cast of Sorrows, which is super weapon.
Yes.
And the great fight is over.
The super weapon created by the Green Court of the Fomorians and gifted to the Red Court. And then in their final act of defiance, the Red King rips it from his chest. And instead of opening it, he breaks apart the keys to it and gives a fragment of each of the keys to a faction of the Tuathan Fae that defeated them.
Are those the keys that are supposed to be of the kingdom in the book that never got released?
Yes. Yes,
yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
In fact, there was the opening fiction to that never-released book that Chris Howard posted on the Changeling forums way back when, and it featured one of those keys.
It is saved in my Changeling the podcast folder for eventual discussion.
And side note, Chris Howard still has all of his old drafts, and I have been talking to him about that.
Really?
Okay.
He was not the only author on that book, so it's just his stuff. But
I seem to recall that, because it was another 3-author book, right? And like each of them was taking one of the geographic areas, and his was done, and someone else's was partly done.
I believe that's about right. And I think that there was another person who didn't really start work on it, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Alas.
Yeah. There's a bit of a history thing. It's getting into like history of the Fae, and it's kind of confusing me. Like, it's presenting the Fomorians ruled the world, and then the Arcadian Fae rose up and did a war and overthrew them. And no mention of the Tuatha De Danann in this, although it talks about them later as being ancient Fae.
I was going to say, in the Kuroksara write-up, the Tuatha don't get mentioned, but they do get mentioned in some of the Fomorian stories later on in the book.
Yeah, I'm having trouble fitting in where the Tuatha did not fit into the chronology.
So the neat thing about this book is this was the first time that the Fomorians really got mentioned as the Fomorians, if I recall correctly. Before this, the big ancient enemy were just referred to as the Dark, and there wasn't really much depth given to them, other than, if I remember right, in the Changeling Second Core book, or it might have been Nobles the Shining Host, I can't remember which, but there's stories of the She returning and some of the stuff that they were either running through or running from on their way to Earth were remnants of the Dark.
I think it's in Nobles, because we've talked a little bit before, or at least I've brought up my pet theory about how there's a Chris Howard meta plot that kind of runs through a few books. And that was
Yes,
the first book that actually mentioned the Tuatha and the Fomorians, I think.
I believe that.
Yeah, sorry. There was a tiny thing in the first edition core book,
Mhm.
but it was mostly doing the thing they kept doing in first edition of, well, the Geru talk about these Fomori things.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is certainly the first book where they're divided into red, white, and green. And I was actually surprised that Chris Howard wasn't a writer on this book, because so many of the ideas that he plays with later appear here.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know Chris Howard was extremely prolific with White Wolf at the time when this book was being done. He might have been tied up on other books. I don't know.
Was he in Atlanta at the time? I'm trying to, like, was this still like everyone in the office together and they were like maybe bouncing ideas off each other or something? Or
I don't know. I do know. I wish I could take credit for it, but my wonderful wife Anna had the thought as I was reading this to look up the writers of these Dreams and Nightmares and kind of look to see what each of them had done in addition to this book.
Very little on Changeling.
Well, I forget which it was. I should have written it down, but I did not. One of them, after this one, worked on Inanimate the Shining. Inanimate the Secret Way, and I can definitely see that with some of the writing in here. I'd be willing to bet it was by him. And then another one worked on the Trinity stuff, just massively prolific on Trinity. So that's neat. But yes, they hadn't done a whole lot on Changeling, or these three had not done a whole lot on Changeling before or after this one.
I almost wonder if that was intentional on the part of Ian Lemke or whomever else to kind of get some, a team that was not at all invested in anything that had been present in the setting before. Like, they have the basics, but then they just go wild.
Yeah, as much as we'll have criticisms of this book, I don't think I'm really thinking there's anything I mind that it's because it contradicted something before this book.
Right, yeah. It's all very self-contained.
It is. And the ideas in this book are fantastic. Like they're just so evocative. That's part of what makes it so frustrating, is because some of this is just so good, and there's no hints at how to use it in your game.
It needs a better editing. It needs a better high level editing to it, I think. Like, this is a great rough draft.
Hashtag White Wolf. Shall we carry on through these realms then?
Let's continue.
Yeah, Capecia?
No, we skipped Rubejal, the Cup of Vine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought that was one of the 5 great beasts. Sorry, I got confused. Okay, yeah.
It is a short one compared with the others.
But it has some neat stuff in it, even though it's short. You want to give the overview, and then I'll kind of dig in a little bit?
Basically, it's these bejeweled tunnels filled with treasure and things beneath the hills of the Dreaming, I suppose. It's a place of pleasure and timeless rounds of couplings and other masquerades that have caused the realm to grow sleepy and drawn. There's references to the Kubera running it, which is actually more in line with the mythological history of Kubera from Hindu mythology. And it strikes me as kind of like, if I were to, if Kuriksara is the dream of war, this is almost like the dream of buried treasure, I suppose. And there's a lot of that fairies under the hill kind of endless parties through eternity vibe.
I didn't think about that, but you're right. That definitely plays into this. What really stuck out to me rereading this realm, I didn't even remember this realm. I must have either skipped over it back in the day or it just didn't make much of an impression on me at the time. But now, reading through it, there's some neat stuff with the history of the Fae in that little bit. Because it has all these treasures buried there that predate the Fomorians. And something called the Mwa.
Yes.
I think that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. Mwa. Yes. that sound like they predate the Fomorians and the Tuatha and everything. And they're the ones that, according to this anyway, instigated the uprising against the Fomorians. But they come up later on in this book again.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
isn't the last. This isn't the last time the moi come up in this.
Well, it's referred to later as a single being, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting, and the embodiment of the sigil of fairy, the first gift for which the tithe to hell is due. And that's basically the only information we get about
Yes.
it, which just leaves me with more questions that I want answered.
Yes. But that open area kind of gives storytellers a little bit of leeway to do with it as they will,
Mm.
and just sort of play around if that's something that they want to dig into in their chronicle. Once again, it would be nice if there were some hints about how to work this stuff into your chronicle. Like,
Yeah.
what are some story hooks around this to give storytellers and players a little bit of a kickstart on their efforts. But still, there's fertile ground here. So.
And then we get to now it's Capacia or
Mhm.
Capacia. Anyway. The
I'm
Clockwork
going to
Sky.
go out on a limb and say that it's actually supposed to be Chapacia, because later on we get the Chapex, and it's after the guy Karol Čapek, who wrote the play RUR, which is where the word robot got introduced into the lexicon. So I wonder if it's supposed to be that.
So this is a cool realm. It's run by chimerical robots, basically. And it's a giant clockwork or mechanical realm with a fake sky. And
So are they chimerical robots or are they an anime? Because there's a lot in here that seem to suggest that they are actually an anime. Just before the anime book got written and really codified what an anime are.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of terminology from that book that made its way in here.
I'd say they're like, what becomes an anime?
Yes.
As it's written.
Yeah.
But it also, I don't understand why it's in the deep. It doesn't make sense to me in the deep dreaming.
Yes, I agree.
Like they have dreamers that they've kidnapped. They do something with to get dreams from them. I'm like, okay, what does that do? Why would you even need that in the deep dreaming with everything they've talked about? They talk about department stores at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are these department stores in this place? And are they like having mannequins in department stores where there's mannequin people running around? Are they talking about Autumn World department stores? In which case, are there like colonies of Chapacia, like in the Autumn World? And they just don't say that, or I'm very confused.
But they have their empire in the department stores wherever they are.
Yeah. It's like, what?
Yes.
I might suggest that this is the dream of modern capitalism. Like the ultimate expression of it is even the people have just become machines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It also, like, it says, banality is not found in the deep dreaming except for from, like, the changelings entering it. I'm like, I don't know what banality is if there's no banality in this place.
Yeah.
From the stuff going on.
Well, I mean, that was actually one of my kind of complaints about this little write-up. It kind of went back to something that Changeling has historically done occasionally that's always kind of rubbed me a little bit the wrong way, where technology is inherently evil and natural places are inherently good.
Yeah.
And you just anything with technology is devoid of creativity and doomed to fail. And this city it's on its last legs. It's about to fall from the sky, and it hints at a whole lot that it's because that they're technological and not having enough natural plant life and animal life in there to keep it afloat.
Yeah, and that too.
That aside, this is still by far my favorite of all of these realms. It just sounds so much fun, and I want to run a game there.
It's my favorite realm, but I would not set it in the deep dreaming if I were running it.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not.
Yeah, this does feel much more like a far dreaming realm than a deep dreaming realm.
I'd put this as like a really weird hidden city in the Autumn World.
I could see that too. Yeah.
There's also an interesting connection perhaps to be made with the automata. Is it automaton or something else? The Kith of Arcadia.
There's a couple of those. There's the Renegade Cogs and the Mech Orgs.
That's the one I was thinking of, yeah. Well, either way, mechanical kiths.
And then we get to what's actually my favorite deep dreaming realm.
I agree. This is actually tied. I should have agreed with.
Yeah. And this makes sense to me in the deep dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Urgarten, the Labyrinthine Knot.
Yep.
It's a giant, really big hedge maze that actually, and it's like there's like this dust that's corrosive everywhere. What this actually reminds me the most of is Exalted, like the stuff with the demon realms and stuff. Reading it, but it feels like an inspiration for that.
I actually got vibes of Proto Changeling the Lost reading this one. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was intentional or not, or as far as Changeling the Lost drawing on this intentionally or not, but I definitely felt the hedge when I was reading this.
That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. The mention of brambles and everything.
It says like it's essentially all trods that
But
can
they're
go.
all crashed into each other and tied up in a knot, and if you get stuck there, you have a very difficult time getting out.
It's rumored that if you could actually get all the way through the maze to the outside, it would just be this barren desert. And there's these beings that can refer to as dreamers with a capital D wandering around. I'm like, are these people sleeping? Are these like physically dreamers taken here for some unknown reason? Like, what are these dreamers?
I would say, because I also, that stood out to me when I was thinking, like, well, wait, I thought it was really hard for mortals to get to the deep dreaming. But given that a dreaming mortal can stumble into at least the near dreaming, and this represents like the ultimate fractal tangle of every possible trod, if a dreamer found themselves on such a trod that eventually led there, that could be like one of the very few ways that they could end up there.
Okay. Yeah.
So one of the things that when I was reading this that I thought would have been a neat little addition to it that could have made for a neat plot hook, but there are no plot hooks. So, but anyway, it would be cool since this is a tangle of intersections and it is the embodiment of every intersection that exists. I thought it would be cool if maybe like if somebody comes to an intersection in the autumn realm and takes a wrong turn at that intersection, ending up in here in this knot on accident would be pretty cool.
If you turn other left.
Yeah. And there's a little sidebar here about something else stuck here. The Wolven mask. Are these like dead white howlers? Is that what they're implying? Because they're definitely implying something. I wasn't quite sure.
It has the Wolven mask, and this little sidebar is the only mention of the Wolven mask at all. But there are wolves on the path that just wander and don't really say anything, don't really do anything other than to accompany people.
Yeah, they're just sad white wolves that stare at you.
But well, I mean, unless it's a meta reference to the company itself, I like that idea that it's the remnants of the White Howler soul or something.
But because there are all these wolves wandering the path, the Wolven mask has become something of an ill omen among trod walkers. So
whatever that means.
I was just saying these wandering around white wolves are the Wolven mask.
Really? Because I thought it was the Wolven mask was an object that was feared because of all the wandering around.
It's got a funny spelling, so it can't be a literal mask, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
But anyway, what is the Wolven mask? Is it the society of these silently wandering around sad dead wolves?
Sure.
Could be.
Something else that, given how in the Rubajal realm we have references to Fiona, we also have here the note that it's the hearthland of the Elened. And I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean. I also don't know if it was a typo and they meant heartland, but either way.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
That stuck out to me too. It seemed like maybe in an earlier draft, these were all supposed to be the home realms of the houses. That got abandoned because not all that, even for at the time when this is written, not all the houses are included, and it just doesn't really.
Well, I was not sure if both of these, if it's talking about she of this house, or it's like were the houses named after somebody specific, and that's who it's about these realms.
Oh, I don't know. Just from that little mention, it just felt like that there was more planned originally.
Every single paragraph feels like there's more planned in here.
It's just because it brings up like the Fiona having some kind of connection to that underground tunnel realm, and then the Ilunid having some strong connection to this labyrinth.
There's a mention of Gwydion under Corexara.
It's true.
And presumably Dougal would be the clockwork one.
presumably, but it never got mentioned. But
Yeah.
that would fit.
Well, they did talk about the makers, which may or may not exist. Yeah, the clockwork.
And then Liam have the Sad Realm.
That would leave it with Liam. Did Liam get mentioned in the Sad Realm? The Empire
I
of
don't think
Regret?
so. There's the Glass Highnesses, which perhaps might have once been she, but
Yeah, Liam does not show up in this book at all.
shall we move on to talking about Arike, the Empire of Regret?
Okay. Yeah, let's move on to the Empire of Regret.
It's wet and sad and full of things with shells and spirals.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, snails are important.
Yeah.
It's so out of left field too, but it's
Yeah.
great. I love the imagery of it.
They should have had them doing battle with like knights and rabbits and stuff.
Yeah. But it does get me in the feels, I will admit, because it's talking about, like, there are 6 known sites in the dreaming to which the snails travel when they realize that they are dying. Because the way is difficult and dying snails travel slowly, most never make it to the graveyards and die somewhere along the way. It's like, geez, book.
Yep.
But I love like snails are the one autumn realm thing that like just wanders into the deep dreaming. It's like on a regular basis.
Where snails go to die. When they go to die, they enter the dreaming and make their pilgrimage.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cooler than Dream Realm Lovecraftian cats, I think.
So yeah, this realm I thought was okay. It felt a little bit more superficial to me than the others. Other than the snail bit, the snail, the snail sidebar is the best part.
Yeah, it does a lot. Most of it's like giving on like, oh yeah, it's really sad. It's like all atmosphere, nothing else. So it'd be like, well, you're here. It's really rainy and sad and wet, and there's snails.
And these two are in the tower just waiting for true love to rescue them. If only true love could bring the sun back.
What? I don't even... Yeah.
There is a note here that I think is relevant to Changeling writ large as a game, where it says, "It is said by Cathane, who should know better, that Arake is the hidden secret of all that has gone wrong with the fairy world of wonders to turn it into a world of darkness," with the relevant words capitalized. So we've talked before about the sort of debates among people of whether or not Changeling should be included in the world of darkness for various silly reasons. But this, I think, points to a good way to frame it, I suppose.
Yeah, it's changed. It's very much you are being killed by the world of darkness. As opposed to...
Yeah. I do like the phrase "the world of wonders" as the opposition to the world of darkness, because it does evoke the mythic age of fairy and the I forget what Mage calls it, the golden age when mages could be
mythic age.
That might be it.
Yeah. And then
on the subject of superficiality, just briefly before we move on, I wanted to hop back to probably my favorite piece of writing, just stylistically in the book, which is for the Irgarden Labyrinth, when they describe the framework. And if you'll allow me to just quote here, it says, "Essentially, the Irgarten is the writhing coils of the world serpent, the convoluted pathways at the belly of the beast, the knotted heart of the world that lies at the center and the crossroads of all the trods. It is the labyrinth, but it is not a place of evil or madness. From the changeling perspective, it is not a fallen part of the world. Rather, the knotwork and interwoven geometry here represents the weave work of dawn itself, the eye of the knitting needle of fate. This is the cat's cradle. As the place that is the convergence of trods, all hyphenated, the Irgarden is best described by the trod formations that most effectively lead to it. Hopscotch, the labyrinth of Daedalus, the hedge maze, and its spontaneously generated ghost cousins, the crop circles. At the center of the Irgarden lies a bottomless well from which anything, external or interior, may be drawn up into the labyrinth." That, to me, is like, that's an entire game in and of itself. And I'm here for it. I just wanted to put that into the... As much as I like the Clockwork City, that's just beautiful.
But you reading it out loud just struck something in me that I didn't get when I was reading it to myself. The way that it mentions the labyrinth and it not being a place of evil, I do wonder if it's meant to be the same labyrinth as what shows up in other World of Darkness games.
Hence the Wolf and Mask.
Or is it the place that David Bowie lives?
Who knows? I don't think there's enough goblins on it.
If anything may be drawn up into the labyrinth, that includes David Bowie in a very revealing pair of tights.
It's the dreaming. He's got to be there somewhere.
Yeah.
Here's where we get into. I complained last episode about, or had the criticism or whatever. The far dreaming didn't do a good enough description, both in this chapter and the other thing, didn't do a good enough description of making the dreaming seem big. We now get into the deep part of the deep dreaming, or the depths of the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely doesn't feel small anymore to me, the dreaming, this part.
No, this was one of the most evocative bits to me when it talks about the
everything.
Yeah, it's hard to really describe it, but the ocean of everything, of infinity, and suspended in it are the oniric realms, and each of those, and one of them being Arcadia, and implying that each of them are worlds in and to themselves.
Yeah, and then like you have these heron women and crawfish men that are born with Arcadia. I'm like, what is going on?
Is that?
that little sidebar has always just given me a WTF moment ever since I first read this book. So.
Oh, this gets back into the moi, the green and black compendia of the moi.
Yep.
Yeah, this is where it's mentioned.
Yeah.
So the first gift for which the tithe to hell is due. Like, tell me more about that, please. But no.
Nope. But you have heron women and crawfish men.
This also maybe this was just a play of words or something. This talks about the Black Court of the Fomorians, and I'm like, what? Is that the fourth court? Like,
yeah.
So I can't remember if it's in this one or if it's in a later book, but the Black Court does come up again, and it's the. I'm trying to remember which book what was.
There is one in the C20 Player's Guide.
There is one in the C20 Player's Guide. There's one in C20 because I put it in C20.
Yeah.
But before C20, it comes up, and I can't remember which book it was. But the Black Court is the prophesized fourth court of the Fomorians when the first three unify.
Oh, interesting.
To write some notes on something I'm doing.
And it was out of that prophecy that I included the Black Court in C20.
Is it maybe Denizens of the Dreaming? Because that rings a bell now that you're talking about it.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was Denizens. That seems like a good place for it to pop up in.
Mm-hmm.
And since you mentioned Chris Howard's meta plot earlier, I know in Harbingers of Winter, Chris Howard included the Black Court as the first court of the Fomorians, the pre-court, before they split into the three courts. So it could be the past and future of the Fomorians.
Well, in the meantime, they've entrusted all of their dark and chthonic glory to heron women and crawfish men, apparently.
They sure have.
Which are also born with Arcadia.
Oh.
Yeah, there's the references here to Luna, the High Queen of Arcadia, and I'm like, oh, come on. Like, this far into the game line, please don't send us back to the moon.
No, or it's just some lady named Luna, and they're just just trolling.
An entity named Luna, who's not necessarily this, what do they call them, the werewolf? Celestines?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the Celestine from Werewolf, just a different Luna.
Mm-hmm. Although they did, in the introduction, refer to the Incarnate as very powerful chimera, so.
Who knows then?
So then, the Sea of Silver. There's another beautiful line in here where it says, at the center of the human heart lies the bottomless well of the universe, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay.
Yes.
Cool.
That was one of my favorite bits in this, where it talks about how the large is contained within the small, and the small contains the large, and the whole thing is like two mirrors reflecting back upon each other, and so you have everything is contained within everything else.
Thinking of media inspirations for what this made me think of, did either of you ever watch the TV series Reboot?
Oh, forever ago.
There was like season 3, they went to the web, and it's just like reminds me of that. Like just
Well, this is one of the few examples in the book where the art actually very detailed, in a very detailed way, matches the description of the realm, because you can see the sea, there's a stone ship floating upon it, there are the Promethean giants standing in it, and then the cataract of like silver whirling stuff that goes up into the sky and presumably fans out into all of the trods, or all of the silver paths.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It is a very literal representation of everything mentioned in that in this section.
Yeah. And that there's the ocean's heart, there's a line here. The sea is incomprehensibly vast, forming the final and deepmost layer of the dreaming, short of the timeless reaches of the deep dreaming itself. What? I thought this was in the deep dreaming. What, help me here?
It is, but it goes back to that that bit about how everything is contained within something else, but that something else exists in the thing that is containing it, or that it's containing. So
this, I got from all this a vague illusion in my, I'm probably just writing, like drawing connections between the lines here, of things beyond the deep dreaming that might be accessible here, which would be just somewhere else, even stranger.
But at some point, it's like, what would you have that be? Like, what is the conceptual difference? It's kind of like the she going from appearance 9 to 13, you know, functionally, what could it
well,
exist?
I would have it no longer being part of the collective unconscious of humanity or the world or anything like that. It's truly alien something is where I'd go with. But
that's what I would do. Like if the dreaming is the collective unconsciousness of humanity, then what lies beyond the dreaming is something utterly inhuman. And so what would that be?
And there's little things like throughout things like, where did the Tuatha De Danann come from and things like that. So maybe they came from there.
The only other thing that I want to mention about the Sea of Silver is that it's apparently also where the Undines come from. And I don't think, once we get to an anime The Secret Way, I think all of this kind of gets thrown out, right? Like the empires are in their own realms in the dreaming, right?
The anime book, if I remember right, is pretty vague on what the empires actually consist of. So these could be the empires, but
I got the impression they were kind of almost like this very fantastical concept in biology that there might be an entire shadow ecosystem going on that we just don't know about, using a different form of life on Earth or something like that.
That's
and
awesome.
It sort of reminds me of that. Like, it's physically located. It's not like it's immaterial or something. The meat folk wouldn't know it's there for the most part.
It just doesn't concern them and is so different. Yes. I do want to mention real quick before we move on from the Silver Sea, I didn't see it in this area when I was reading it, preparing for this, but I could have sworn I remembered somewhere in this talking about how the Silver Sea is also the same thing that's in Wraith.
The Tempest?
The Tempest, yes.
It seems a lot calmer.
It does seem a lot calmer, but in the middle of it, there's that giant maelstrom. So
I think there's a reference to when they're talking about the different Umbrae, and there's a reference, it's like the Seas of Dream, maybe, or like one of the other dreaming oceany things is equated with the Tempest, because that sounds familiar.
It could be.
But yeah, this does, there are connections here where this could be two different, both here and in that labyrinth thing, connected somehow to Oblivion.
Yep.
In a way.
The Green Court sleeps beneath the Silver Sea, and and there are hints that the Green Court and the Neverborn might be one and the same.
We also have the very quick note in here that the center of the sea is a place of absolute calm. There, the Voyager may find a small isle, which is Arcadia. Of course, the fact that the Sea of Silver is infinite means that its center would be rather difficult to encounter if it exists at all. Thanks, book.
Yes.
That gives me like vibes of things from the 19th century and early 20th century where people just read a math textbook and then didn't quite understand it but had a weird fever dream.
I think you've described this entire book.
Yeah, well, that bit with the thing going on too, with when we were talking about like the relationship of the Umbra and the dreaming, I'm like, that's definitely both non-Euclidean and more than three-dimensional. So, and metaphorically described. So,
anyway, shall we carry on to the home realms?
Yeah. So there's a little bit on the Promethean giants, which I think might relate to the previous thing. I don't know what this is supposed to
Yeah.
be.
The Promethean giants were related to the Silver Sea. They're a neat concept. Something, these beings that predate. Did it say that they predate existence? I couldn't.
No, they predate Arcadia. Possibly predate
Arcadia.
Arcadia.
Okay, that's right. But they're just impossibly old things that are standing watch and are slowly.
Oh, it also suggests Arcadian is a separate like language, and they speak an ancient version of Arcadian.
To the point that you had made earlier, Charlie, about, the incomprehensible stuff that's even beyond the deep dreaming, there's the note that they do not appear to be the product of fairy glamour and may in fact not be the product of any human dreaming. It makes me think that they're like the probes sent by beings from outside of the dreaming to like observe or something.
or beings that got lost from their own
Yeah.
space and ended up in
Rogue
in
celestials.
human headspace. Yeah,
Or maybe they were here before the dreaming was formed.
could be.
And then we get the home. So we get now to the home realms. This is
In a weird spot in this book, I gotta say.
Yeah.
This is another thing. I'm like, maybe this should have been. This would have made a lot more sense to me in the far dreaming too.
It would have, yes, and it's such a abrupt transition going from this amazing write up of the depths of dream and the sea of silver to the home realms.
Yeah. I do want to point out, I mean, we've kind of been treating this because the chapter kind of treats the realms as kind of points along this single linear path, but I don't think it actually spells out like where the home realms are located or even where some of the other realms we've already read are located.
That's
so
true.
I feel like you could put them in either if you wanted.
Yeah, well, these are all more like categories. And it does explicitly say in other parts of the book that all these realms shift around all the time anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. It never really establishes what part of the dreaming some of these are, and there's no reason to think that they're all.
But I do think though, in the order of the book, putting this super deep dreaming stuff might have made sense at the end of this chapter.
Yeah, I agree. It is a bit of a letdown going from the Sea of Silver to the home realms.
That being said, I love the narrative explanation of the home realms. I think that's a great historical note about this failed experiment to open a trod to Arcadia that the commoners did during the interregnum, and they just ended up creating this patchwork of their ideas of home. So we've got 3 of them that survive.
Well, the Myrmidon, I think, is a cooler Boggin realm than the Fields Beyond.
Yes, absolutely agreed.
It's cities that are just full of intrigue, but mostly non-violent, and it's all just let's just make everything complicated. And then the Slua live underneath it in tunnels, which this just reminds me of dungeons from Dungeons and Dragons, kind of, but more creepy.
I was thinking Nosferatu from Vampire the Masquerade. I got a lot of vibes of that. Except I did like the inner sanctum of the tunnels where the floor is covered in grates and you can look out and peer out the grate, see stuff going on in places in the Autumn Realm from the other side of the corresponding grate.
And there's another way of getting into the dreaming that you shouldn't take.
Maybe you shouldn't take that one, no.
Maybe you dropped your keys and now those are in the deep dreaming.
Reminds me of the memes that came out after the most recent It movie came out.
Yes.
It's like, where you got Pennywise. Hey, there's stuff down here.
The end of the write-up for this Slua tunnel realm kind of annoys me because it's like, it's the perfect home for a Slua, and then it's haunted, of all things, by a chimerical ghost. This ghost is relatively harmless. And I'm thinking, we're in the deep dreaming. Give me something a little bit more than that.
Oh. Yeah,
even maybe just a real ghost that's been stuck there and is really messed up right now.
Yeah,
even that.
Yeah, or get some specters to haunt the hallways or something. It would have been more interesting.
Yeah, I think this even more just hits. Okay, I'm sticking the home realms in the far dreaming when I run.
Yep.
Then we get to Balloon.
It's the best one.
Do you want to cover this one, Puka? Or
I absolutely do. So Balloon, it's the Puka realm, and there are lots of dirigibles and flying airships flying around, carrying deadly pie bombs and high explosive seltzer bottles.
Other Puka realm.
Yes, but
You get 2 realms in this book.
Damn straight.
Technically 3.
So then it's full of riddles and booby traps and things, and it's run by a communist collective because of course it is, but it also resembles 18th century France because that was when balloons became a thing. There's a balloon armory and a place called the Toy Room. That's a combination meeting hall and laboratory.
That's a cake. It's a stale
Yeah.
A
birthday
literal
cake.
cake. Yes.
Also that. And then a sort of separate subrealm called the Fun House, which looks like an abandoned carnival run by this bedlamed puka named Josiah and his merry pranksters who turn out to be beasties. And there's just so much potential here, and I love it.
I really like how Funhouse came about because these are realms that were created not recently, but in the grand scheme of the dreaming, fairly recently.
Yes.
So the people who established these realms are still around, presumably.
Yeah.
And Funhouse got into existence when the founder of Balloon, the changeling responsible for Balloon existing, fell to Bedlam.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that ended up twisting his realm and creating Funhouse.
It actually reminds me of an episode of Batman the Animated Series where like the Joker's running an abandoned carnival or like something like that. Okay, that's
which is also the Killing Joke, like the famous.
Right, that's
which I'm sure they couldn't adapt for the show aimed at children.
I did like the Guardian of Balloon being a sphinx that tells riddles, and the way you answer the riddles correctly is to just lie through your teeth with utter confidence. And you can't copy other people's answers either. It's got to be your own lies.
It's interesting. You brought up the Funhouse thing, like, because I hadn't thought of that before. If this entire Home Realms experiment was carried out a few hundred years ago, the notion of like a modern carnival in the way that it's represented here postdates that. So there must be some kind of subconscious or otherwise communication between the ideas of dreamers and this realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there have been, for one thing, I think there's been more changelings showing up there, especially since the resurgence.
Yeah, these places are populated by changelings, so there's got to be some sort of immigration of changelings happening.
Although, well, in the dreaming, changelings don't age, but
that's true.
Still.
That's true.
Yeah.
But the description of how these realms got established, I didn't get the impression that it was like a city full of changelings doing this. It was like a handful of people.
Yeah.
And so this has to have been populated after the fact and being sustained after the fact somehow.
They mention in the tunnel section that there are fewer than 40 Slua here at any time, so presumably they come and go a little more frequently. So that's chapter 4. Okay. What do we think?
I think it's a great thing to get ideas from and then take those ideas and then do something with them and flesh those out.
Yes.
I ran a chronicle that existed because I got inspired by the Splintered Mountains and the Kuriksara, the Killing Fields. It just fired my brain so much when I read about them that I had to do something with them.
Yeah, the one time I did something with the Deep Dreaming, we just kind of riffed it. It's like, this is just ideas to doing that, I think.
Yeah. It strikes me as the kind of thing that, you could run a chronicle or at least an extended story that's all about going to one of these realms, exploring one of these realms, getting back from one of these realms, and that would just take up the entire space. Like, you couldn't just say, okay, this session we're all going to go to Kuriksara or something. Like, we're just going to hop on over there. I don't think it would.
Which is the way the book seems to present these realms as places for you to go to and explore and have your thing and then come back or whatever. In the chronicle I ran, though, it was I did it a bit more the way I wish this book did it. It had the stuff from the Splintered Mountains and Kuriksara intruding onto the PCs and making it the PC's business. And so stuff from there ended up threatening the Autumn Realm. And so they ended up having to take their issues there directly to deal with it.
That's it. I think it also could use this both ways, but like you're going to somewhere in the Deep Dreaming and you're going along the Silver Path, you found one of the few ones that go through this. You could take a bunch of these realms with their small descriptions, and it's like it is just a place you walk through while you're staying on the Silver Path and not getting involved in, but it has enough that you could describe things and just like be like, wow, where am I now? Like,
I just feel like it would be a disservice to have it be like a throwaway like that. I mean, in the sense that,
well, not everything.
yeah, I just feel like there's so much to dig into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
I did that with one of the realms in there. I forget the name of it, but it's one where there's all these cute kids, but they're just superficially cute. They're actually cannibals or something like that. And
Mhm.
so they were going through the dream. They were traveling through the dreaming to get to their destination, and they ended up going through this realm. And they were approached by all these cute kids. And one of the characters is like, "Oh, they're so cute. We need to stay here with them and do stuff with them." And the rest of the PCs were like, "Nope, nope. We are
Yeah.
out of here. We
Yep.
are gone. They are too cute to be friendly. They are too
Yep.
sweet to be healthy to us. We are out."
Well, what I would recommend is like you pick one of these realms, or this one of these realms is the destination of the PCs, right? But then like throw in what 5 other of them that's here as places you go to before you get to where you're going.
Yeah.
It's like one session going through it on Silver Path, and give the idea like, yeah, there really are countless other places, just to give this depth of it. But then also, yeah, zoom in somewhere and talk about and go there.
I guess
Yeah.
you could. I personally wouldn't want to. Like, I couldn't have Balloon occupy only one session.
I don't mean balloon specifically, but
Okay.
there's a lot of them.
Well, I mean, for you it wouldn't be one session, but for other troops it might be. Like it could be
Yeah.
an interesting diversion depending on the chronicle that's being run.
Oh, I don't even mean a full session on these realms. Like you
Mhm.
could have 5 realms in a session that
Oof.
you wander through, or things you saw in the distance, or things that you know.
Yeah. Well, my children cannibals were less than a session. They were like just a. I introduced the super cute kids, and the players were like, "No, no, we are out. We are not staying for this." But stuff like that's fun because it adds spice to your travels.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, speaking of travels, we get to chapter 5.
Hearth and Highway. This is a weird chapter in a weird book.
For some reason, we get an in-character narrator for I'm not sure why.
Yeah, Professor Humnus T.E. Hardknocks 51.
and he seems to only be for half this chapter.
Yeah,
He's only for the freehold part of the chapter. We get a separate narrator for the trod section.
Oh, I thought it was the same one. Oh, okay.
No, or at least I didn't get the impression it was the same one. This one,
Yeah.
the voice sounded different to me. Like this guy is a professor lecturing his students, who he presumes are she and everything, about how they are going to maintain their freeholds.
See, I had thought the whole thing was narrated by one Puka. And at one point, he says he's an Ishu, and I'm like, that's too blatant a lie for a Puka.
that would be a great reading of this chapter. Yeah, this is tangential to the dreaming and pretty much the rest of this book.
something that I had commented when we spoke about this before is that I was surprised that this was chapter 5, because it seems to me like, because the chapter's about freeholds and trods, if you're running a chronicle or session or whatever that's going to be entering the dreaming, that strikes me as the point at which you should start, rather than after you get through all the dreaming stuff in all the
Mhm.
realms.
Yeah, this chapter feels more like it belongs as an appendix than an
Mhm.
actual chapter because
Mhm.
it's tangential to the real subject matter of the book.
Or an introduction.
Or an introduction, yeah. That would work too.
Yeah, I think we should let the Fertilis come through and reshape
Yes.
the chapters in this book.
Adobe Firkless. So,
Okay, so it starts out with talking about freeholds.
And it doesn't have a whole lot to say on freeholds, really.
yeah.
It goes into the affinities of the freeholds, and it just felt like an odd choice to me to have the freeholds based around the realms, especially when it goes through and calls out some of the realms in particular as just not being suitable for freeholds, or well suited
Yeah.
for freeholds.
This whole thing reads to me like, rather than being an objective system for what's all in character, this is like one person's paradigm
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
one
yeah.
phase paradigm of freeholds.
Yeah,
Also, he totally missed out the time affinity.
Yeah, the time realm is conspicuous in its absence.
Well, so
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to remember, was there the concept of freehold affinities somewhere in first edition, like in Freeholds and Hidden Glens or elsewhere, before time was its own realm? Because if they just kind of imported that and added narrative padding.
No.
Oh
I'm
gosh.
pretty sure this
So
is unique.
yeah, I
Yeah.
am too. I don't think this came up in Freeholds and Hidden Glens. And until this chapter, that was the most Changeling got as a how to use a freehold book. So
Yeah, that's fair.
There are little interesting sidebars of various
Yes.
little blurbs about freeholds, which is kind of neat.
yeah, the sidebars struck me as odd too, because not all of them, but a significant number of them were more about the changelings who live in the freehold than the freehold
Mm.
itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which it would have been nice to have, I think, more illustration of freeholds with some of these sidebars.
And some of them I'm not sure are actually freeholds. Like the tree.
The tree, interestingly enough, I thought that the tree was the most interesting thing in this chapter, or at
Oh, I
least
think
in
it's
this.
interesting. I just didn't know I didn't really feel like a freehold to me.
It does. I think it's meant to be a glade.
Oh, okay. Covered in bells.
I liked the rainstorm's edge, where it says this transient phenomenon occurs at the precise boundary of all rainstorms. And like, I don't know, it doesn't really give much more detail than that, but I like that as some kind of magical space. It says sky magics and seemings are rejuvenated here, and like it's a very evocative kind of detail.
That one is cool, but it felt more like Trods than freeholds to me.
Right, yeah, well, and then we transition into some
Well,
trots
that
at
was in
the
the
end.
trod section.
Yeah.
Oh, we're
Yeah.
transitioning. I'm
Yeah.
following now. Yes.
In between that, they have a weird sidebar about how you can become a lost one too.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tells you, and it doesn't treat it as something that you would want to avoid either. It's like, yes, this is a way to become powerful. Okay.
Yeah, and they learn it from the nymphs. Going back to our theme, Puka, of trying to figure out what the heck the nymphs are supposed to be. They come back here.
I've added it to the list. So Kithbook Nymph will arrive. So I want to point to my favorite part of the chapter, really the only part of the chapter that I really like, which is that we get a specific Wayfarer's Escheat, which consists of the following 6
Mm-hmm.
directives, I suppose you'd call them. Stay on the path, never retrace your steps, journeys are different from trips, journeys have shapes, remember your destination, and time disappears on the road. And this is something that I can see like working into a game narratively and having like, the issue abide by it and instruct travelers about it and everything. And, the code of the trod rather than the code of the freehold, I think is an interesting notion.
It is, and one of the things that I think is really neat about it is it's so punchy and to the point, and really gets what it does what it's trying to do so well,
Mm-hmm.
that this is one of the things in the book that stuck with me about this book ever since I first read it back in the late '90s, and it has come up in pretty much every game I've ever run or played in that has dealt with travel through the dreaming. Those rules of how you travel through the dreaming are always something that's been used, and it's interesting to me that it seems to come up with everybody who's read this book. They follow it without even thinking about it.
Well, I think it's because it's an idea that it immediately demonstrates filling a gap in the lore, and it connects so easily to something that does already exist. So it's,
Yes.
what do we have? A couple other notes on trods. I like the trods part better than the freeholds part because they do say things like, oh, okay, scrying destinations, subverting locks and getting around barriers, finding shortcuts. So it is nice to kind of have, even though it's still this weird semi-in-character voice, it's nice to have this kind of description of, okay, here's how changelings deal with all of the stuff you're going to find on a trod. I think that's useful both as a storyteller and a player.
Yes. I also, just as a little sidebar, I do like how personally offended the narrator is by closed doors.
Yes. How dare they?
How dare they?
I actually like the little thing on Orpheo's path.
I do
Where
like that too.
if you can get if you get little eggshells, you can make like a fake silver path. If you can just walk on them without crunching them, do not crunch them. It's very
Portable
bad.
trod
Yeah.
for the extra nimble.
Yeah, some of these little cool sidebars are wonderful.
I actually did have a player use that in a game I was running.
Oh, nice.
And also the Murphy tunnels, the secret network of trods that are contained within folded up Murphy beds.
And the Murphy Corporation is run by knockers.
Yeah.
Least...
I had forgotten about that bit entirely, and I was just dying laughing when I was reading that sidebar. Yeah. It was so great.
It reminded me of that scene in The Great Muppet Caper when they're all sitting on a Murphy bed and then they all fly up into the wall together. Anyway.
Yes.
Yep. I did get so confused by the little section on the Silver Road.
Yeah.
And talking about how the silver winds its way to... I'm like, is this not the Silver Path? Is this some other thing? Like, what is this talking about?
Yeah, it is interesting because it's like whoever wrote that section didn't really talk to anyone else.
Or read other stuff. Like, it's just, yeah.
But I think that they might have been intending it as the origin of the Silver Path, but that's not really what it ended up being.
One other note that I think is quite interesting in the other sidebar on this page, the San Buenaventura, which is the lost dream river of Western Concordia. There's a note at the bottom where it says Davith, out of spite, cursed it shortly after the retreat of the Rocky Mountain Columbine Kingdom. And I had never thought about, like, before the Sidhe came back and set up the kingdoms of Concordia that are currently known, were there other commoner kingdoms that we just never hear about, like this one?
Mm-hmm. I think some of them would have not been called kingdoms, but yes. Definitely were places.
Well, I think some of the books do make a big deal about how changelings tend to gravitate towards the title and the pomp and circumstance, so that even in the absence of the Sidhe, you still have changelings trying to fill out that role of the king and the queen and the dukes and everything like that.
Yeah, but they also probably made empires and republics and stranger things. Yep. Mm-hmm. As long as it's pomp and circumstance and grandness.
Yes.
Oh, and one other piece is that with the Silver Road, they mention that the presence of silver, with that capital S, indicates that your journey will follow all the rules of dawn and the story, again, capital S. So if that's what the silver in the Silver Path is, ontologically, it's fate and story, what does that imply about the nature of the dreaming, and then by extension, the nature of anything not on the Silver Path? Just food for thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking earlier, like some discussion. I was just sort of thinking. My thoughts spun off of the conversation about lost versus dreaming and stuff, and it got me thinking. Like, the dreaming contains story, but it's not just stories and narrative. There's other things that do not really follow a narrative structure. Things that follow a dream structure, things that follow stranger structures, and if you can say they have a structure, but you could say maybe the Arcadian dream or the Silver Path and stuff is, a hero's journey. It is a narrative imposed on the wider dreaming.
That notion of imposition is an interesting one too.
Well, you can kind of get into the nature of the human collective unconsciousness is the driving force of the dreaming currently, and what do humans like to do? We like to impose narrative on things.
Yeah.
So anything that is random, we tend to ascribe stories and cause and effect to it.
It's the kind of thing, I feel like this book has lots of really deep commentary on changeling as a setting, but the pieces are so buried and in some cases so quickly moved on from that you really have to work to connect them into something useful. And that's me transitioning into talking about this book as a whole. What did you think of the book as a whole?
This is both if you're running a game of C20, this and Enchanted to me are the two most important books from before C20 to have, because a lot of the other things are still cut. This is a very good book to have, and at the same time, it's a hot mess. I love it, but I can't. It sort of, I think it epitomizes where I thought about Changeling, especially before C20 came out. Of it's the game I love, but I had trouble saying that I like it. You can't just take this book and go, "Oh, this is the setting book for the Dreaming." No, you can't do that. But it can be a great inspiration for running games in the Dreaming. But you have to do a lot of heavy lifting as a storyteller, and as a player, just don't expect it as canonical either. Even if your character should know what's in the Dreaming that it's covering, don't assume this is what's happening in the because even if both you and the storyteller are trying to do that,
you can't really stop and think about it.
yeah, because if both you and the storyteller both read this book and are treating it canonical, you're going to have very different interpretations. So
yeah, I would definitely echo all of that. This is an indispensable book. It is one that has inspired whole chronicles, but yes, it takes some effort.
Yeah.
It takes effort on the part of the storyteller. It takes effort on the part of the player. It comes so close to being just wonderful, and it is wonderful in places.
it's full of
it
wonder.
is full of wonder. Yes,
World of wonders.
It is full of wonder. Yes, that's a good
Such
description.
as, how was this edited properly? That's one of the wonders.
Was it even?
Makes you wonder too.
Well, so kind of spinning off that more generally, I mean, whether or not you use this book, do either of you have particular strategies that you would, I guess, recommend to listeners for setting up a chronicle in the Dreaming? Like, what are the specific things that you have to attend to?
Ooh, that's a good question. One of the things that I do using this book for a guide to the Dreaming is to not necessarily worry about the details of this book, but use the contours to describe the Dreaming. So if you get if you can't get too bogged down in all the dream realms and everything like that, because if you try and make a map of the Dreaming using this book, you're just going to waste your effort.
Well, it explicitly says in many times and explains why you can't make a map of the Dreaming.
You cannot make a map of the Dreaming. And you can't include all the dream realms in here, and you wouldn't want to. What you'd want to do is take these as some inspiration to really make the Dreaming yours and really make it fit the chronicle and whatever story you're wanting to tell with the Dreaming, because that's what the Dreaming is. It's stories, and those stories should be yours. They shouldn't be this book's.
For me, for running a game, the thing to keep in mind with or without this book is how I think of the Dreaming as, if you're going in the Dreaming, and I don't mean like you're going in a freehold and you're like hanging out in the back garden, but if you're actually traveling in the Dreaming, traveling should be part of the story. Moving along the Trod should be part of the story. Getting off the Trod should be like, they should be terrified of getting off the Trod and getting lost. And it should be a bunch of things happening as you're going through. Like, don't plan, oh, we're going to spend, I don't think you should, unless you're maybe going from two near points in the near Dreaming, have the same session be where you enter the Dreaming and where you arrive at your destination in the Dreaming. You need like a travel adventure with these series of places and challenges and things that happen. And it's the kind of thing where like I'm not big on planning ahead for a lot of things, but like, no, I'd plan that out.
I will just do an aside here real quick because of what you said. I was running a Changeling game years ago, and some people, the players, decided that they needed to go in the Dreaming right then.
Oh no!
They decided that the only solution to the problem was to go into the Dreaming, and they came up with a good way to do it, and so they did. And as soon as they did, I was like, okay, we're going to have to break the session here, because I need to figure out this, because the Dreaming isn't just something that you go into lightly, either as a player or as a storyteller.
Yeah, the only exception be specific exceptions for sometimes in the near Dreaming only.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
Even then,
if it's the local Dreaming right around your local freehold, then that can be fairly well known. But
or like I ran a LARP when I was playing in a LARP. I can't remember if I was running or playing in it. Anyway, there was like a Ishu who was both like very experienced and had a bunch of Dreamcraft. And okay, fine. Within the LARP session, they had traveled from one location to another and showed up like mid-session. Like they'd gone off and then come back, like gone off for an hour and then come back. Like I think it takes that kind of thing to be. But yeah, generally, yeah, it should be plan out a whole travel story from going somewhere in the dreaming with a bunch of different places that you're going through.
I almost feel like it's not a bad idea to almost have like a mini session 0, kind of like you were saying, Charlie, about breaking from one session to the next. And not just, I mean, because the players may have read everything there is about the dreaming, you might know it inside and out as a storyteller, but I think every dreaming jaunt, not even every table's version of the dreaming, like every time they go in, it can and maybe should be different. So it's important to set expectations
Hmm.
outside of the game and then confound the expectations inside of the game and kind of figure out how to navigate that. So, like, if you're a player, you'll want to know what the stakes are. Like, okay, we're going into the dreaming. How likely am I to die or find a treasure or whatever? But then your character, you have to hash out what your character thinks about the dreaming, and then the storyteller's role is to decide how much of that they want to overturn. Because with the dreaming, you can overturn as much of it as you want, you know, but it has to be, I feel, at the character level, and the players really need something solid to cling to.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do want to say one thing as a teaser for a future, fairly far in the future episode. I think a very useful book to help run games in the dreaming is the first edition Exalted book, The Fair Folk, talking about traveling through the wild.
Mm.
I will get into that later, but I think that has actually a good way to structure traveling through the dreaming from like a somewhere between it's like a narrative geography structure, and I think that can actually help a lot with your dreaming games. Even though it's a different game, it was originally conceived of as a prequel, even though it went on different directions when it was
Yeah,
published.
but
But
they still included all the Easter eggs for the World of Darkness.
yeah,
So,
and it basically turned into like I think it's traveling trods through the dreaming to get from to destination. Actually, has with waypoints and whatever the word was for connecting between waypoints. I think actually does has some good advice in there for Dreaming Chronicles.
That makes me think, just in terms of books that might be useful. Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino is something that I always think of in relation to dreaming games, where it's just these short vignettes about these really fantastical cities that don't actually exist. And then some of the work by the Japanese poet Basho kind of reminds me, when you're saying narrative geography, that's what I think of, with these sort of descriptions of places that they are places along a road, but the way that he describes them and kind of intermixes them with haiku, the feel is much more important than like trying to pinpoint these on a map, you know? So I like that a lot. The teaser that I wanted to say, Charlie, is there anything that you are working on lately that you would like to share about, which may or may not be relevant to this discussion?
well, surprisingly that you mentioned it, yes, there is. Radio Free Arcadia is working on a C20 compatible source book for the Dreaming.
Mm.
Yeah. The idea is not to supplant Dreams and Nightmares. It's intended as a companion piece. It doesn't just address the shortcomings in Dreams and Nightmares, but that is part of what it does. It also takes a different look into what the dreaming is than Dreams and Nightmares does. It's a lot more about the story potential of the dreaming and how changelings and mortals alike both exist in relationship to it, and how you can tell stories based around that, about how mortals feed the dreaming and how the dreaming feeds mortals, and changelings the same way. How do they? What's their relationship to it? Because they were once the rulers of dream, and now they're not. And what does that mean for them?
Nice. I called this a teaser because I hope that when it is released, you will be able to come back to talk about it some more.
I would love to. Right now, I have gotten all of the first drafts back except for one, so it is coming along nicely.
Woohoo!
So hopefully, it won't be too much longer.
So yeah, is there anything else you have recently come out with, or
The most recent thing that's been released that I did was Glamour's Chosen for Seventh Sea, released through Explorers Society.
Oh.
It is a look at playing the fair folk and using glamour in the Seventh Sea setting.
ah?
In general, if people were interested in that or other of your work, are there places they can find you around the interwebs?
I am Charlie Cantrell on Facebook. Radio Free Arcadia also has a page on Facebook. I am Puka Knight just about everywhere else. You'll see me on Discord with some regularity. I have a Twitter account that is Puka Knight, but it is rarely used these days.
Right on.
Okay. Thanks for being here again, Charlie, and we're looking forward to
Thank
having
you.
you
It's
again.
always a pleasure.
You can find us, our website, changelingthepodcast.com. You can find our Discord, discord.me/CTP. You can find our Facebook page, Changeling the Podcast. You can email us, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. You can send us a toot, changelingpod@dice.camp. That's our Mastodon.
All links will be in the show notes.
And so once again, I'm Josh.
People say that I remain Puka.
And don't try to eat those crab people. The heron ladies won't be happy.
And remember, when in doubt, the answer is always balloon. Fey oneurologists have hypothesized that outside the dreaming, it's just more dreamings all the way down. At the same time, they acknowledge that down is a word that has particularly little meaning when talking about the spatial relationships between dreamings, and that better direction words might include outwards, other up, widdershins, or balloon, because if any direction you're going in the dreaming is not turned towards the realm of balloon, then what is the point of your even being there in the first place? To help us continue asking important rhetorical questions like this one, as well as bringing you Changeling the Dreaming content week after week until the green court sloughs off its shiny membrane and rises again, we welcome your support for our podcast by leaving a review on the listening platform of your greatest convenience. You can also sign up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast and join the esteemed ranks of folks who get a shout out at the end of each episode. They include Derek, Dorchadas, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razgaboos, Sanchiger, Sija, and Terry Robinson. Feel free to stop by our Discord at www.discord.me/CTP to hang out and chat about all things Fey and fabulous. Thanks for your ears, and until next time, keep on dreaming.